What the hell is thought leadership? You really have to bring something new to the table. What kind of experience do you want to give people? What do you value? Don't pay attention to the words. Pay attention to the flow, the story, the meat. It's okay to have a point of view. CEOs don't read SEO listicles. They just don't. You have to understand what are your core competencies that you really need to have in-house. It's just stuff that you're not just going to outsource and somebody's just going to get it overnight. It's going to take time. I don't actually say the words, but I'm like, this person gets me. I want to go with this person. The word content really means what types of things you want people to learn across the curriculum. Damn, not pulling out any punches there. So jump right in. All right. You get it. You know the audience. You get the point. You get the strategy. What do you want them to know, feel, do?
I would love to hear a little bit about your content marketing philosophy and the role content can play within an organization.
Ultimately, it's something that I've felt for a long time, and I'm just really starting to say it more and more. And it's by default. It's because of the companies that I've been working with these last 3 to 4 years. And that is, companies that are selling into the C-suite, long sales cycle, enterprise sales, high ACV, and that brings me to my philosophy, which is CEOs don't read SEO listicles. They just don't. And if you really want to sell into the C-suite, you need to have some thought leadership. You need to have a unique point of view. You need to do a bunch of different things than, say, if you are selling Polar Seltzer to the masses. I'm going to pick it up at the grocery store on a whim, cute unicorn label. I'm going to buy it. I don't work with those kinds of companies. So you really have to bring something new to the table to get the attention of the C-suite. And so for me, that's thought leadership, content, although thought leadership is such a, like you said the other day, crap term. And it really is. Like, what the hell is thought leadership? We should freaking talk about that a lot more than we do. What does it mean to be a thought leader? Can a company be a thought leader? Does it have to be an individual? Can we have employees across a B2B company, banging the drum with the company's point of view? And does that turn them into thought leaders by default? There's so many, things that we should be talking about in terms of what is thought leadership. And I think that if you work for a B2B company, doing especially enterprise sales, selling into the C-suite, you should have an opinion on this. And I've been really trying to develop mine, thinking about it a lot lately. It's a really important topic.
So it's interesting. We had Tracy Wallace on a few months ago, actually. And one of the things she said, and I would love to get your take on this too, is that thought leadership is not a format, it's a result. What do you think about that?
First, I freaking love Tracy. Hi, Tracy. She's so great. So I think that really dates back to the initial definition of what is thought leadership. If you go to like Wharton Business School, they're going to talk about thought leadership in a very different way than a lot of marketers are talking about thought leadership on LinkedIn. And marketers on LinkedIn are talking about it to describe a category of content, research reports, thought leadership blogs. And that is really any blog that's not designed to rank organically. It's a blog where I'm talking about my brand narrative and I'm talking to different people on the buying team at different points of their journey. So that is, I think, what marketers have turned thought leadership into. But by definition, at its truest and purest sense, it is thought in action and practice. And that's the missing component. It's not just speaking your thoughts into the abyss. It's actually taking action, getting a community to rally around these ideas and going out and living these new ways of doing things and ways of approaching the world. And I would say Tracy's absolutely right. And it's the same kind of conversation that harkens back to what is content, right? I've had this conversation with some people on LinkedIn. Content has evolved by definition. Historically, before we had the internet and the web, we had curriculum. We had teachers and education and instructional design. And the word content really means what types of things you want people to learn across the curriculum. By the time they're done engaging with your content, what should they be able to know, think, feel, etc.? However, language evolves and shifts over time. And by default, we had to categorize different types of writers, categorize different types of copy and content that, companies can use to, language evolves. So now content is not just the curriculum or the idea. It's now described as a blog post is content. It's the format. So it's the same kind of conversation with thought leadership, I believe. But I do agree with Tracy. But I also agree that thought leadership content is a really easy way to describe the kind of content that I like to create.
It's interesting because I've worked within a couple of large organizations. And one of the things that we found, especially on like brand team, is you would ask, hey, who here is on the content team? Who here does content? And your advertising team would raise their hands, and the podcast team would raise their hands, and the YouTube team would raise their hands, and then like the blog team would raise their hands. And I think it's important more now than ever to recognize content with a capital C. Like, the focus of this show is for sure like editing articles, but like the whole idea, the whole principle behind editorial in general is to come up with that, or to make stuff that's good, right? Okay, so you had actually mentioned something that was interesting to me, and it was the idea of creating a point of view, right? I think a lot of companies, right, and a lot of authors in particular are afraid to take a point of view, to have a perspective, and would rather play it safe and talk to everybody, or at least speak in a more generic, bland kind of way. Because I know you work with do client work now. What is your, what's that conversation look like with folks, and how are you like communicating that philosophy to your clients and to the businesses that you're working with?
First, I'm kind of lucky because I don't work in traditionally, regulatory compliance-laden industries like finance and healthcare, and that can be much more difficult to really be able to have a point of view. I tend to work with companies that they can have a stronger point of view, and it's okay. They're not going to, be getting sued for having a point of view. So I think that it's very important, if you can, and you are in an industry that is, risk tolerant, I think that you should have a point of view, and it can really help you get known, and it can help you build your brand faster than if you're just blending in with the masses, especially when you're talking about, there's a lot of, consultants that work with executives for executive coaching, and most of them are really freaking brilliant. A lot of them have been executives. A lot of them are published authors. Some teach at universities. These are brilliant freaking people. And you would never really know it because they all kind of play it safe and sound the same. And it's really hard to choose, like, who am I going to go with?
Right.
So imagine if one said something a little more bold and it just kind of grabbed you, and you're like, damn, this person gets me. Like, I want to go with this person. And that is what you are risking if you decide to play it safe when you actually work in an industry, in a space where it's safe to have a point of view. You don't need to attract everybody. I don't want to, beat a tired horse. Everyone says this all the time. You all know this. You're listening in. It's okay to have a point of view. It's actually, in my opinion, preferable.
Right. So how are you having those conversations to extract that from the people that you're working with?
Oh gosh. So it's really an evolution for me. I'm pretty new into doing my own thing. I've had clients on the side on and off for 7 years working with businesses and content marketing, but I've only been working completely 100% for myself for, 4 months, something like that. So I'm still evolving my process for extracting that. I have found that I have an easier time working with companies who already kind of have a vision. They don't have to have it documented. It's not like we've created this category and we have this perfect, narrative on paper. I don't need that, but I need you to have some sort of sense for why you exist, why you're different, what's wrong with the market. I need you to at least know that. I'm not quite a good fit for people who don't even know that, and they just kind of like, we're doing this thing because we want to help people. Like,
right.
We all want to help people. If you're not an asshole, you're a nice person, you want to help people. So like, that's not enough to differentiate your business. So I would say I look for people who already have that, and then I can help bring that out. And a huge piece is interviews. Anytime I, start a big project, I conduct a lot of interviews. I love it. It's actually really fun.
What was that like internally? Because we have a lot of folks who watch this who are internal, like content leads within larger organizations. What was that conversation like? Because there was a very good voice, right? Very strong voice that happened there. Did you have to like pull that out of people, or like, did they give you a lot of trust?
Oh God, I was just so fortunate to work. So it's a predictive index, and we were called PI. And when I got there in 2018, I was a content team of one hired to really build out the content function as they scaled their operations. And we were getting ready to launch a category, and the senior team there are extremely brilliant. And they had a really clear vision for what this category was going to be and how we were going to evolve our product so that it became a platform which enabled you to implement these category recommendations and practice this new discipline called talent optimization. And so when I got there, it was really exciting. I had a month or two to kind of dip my toes, learn about the software, learn about the audience. And then I worked exclusively with the executive team to get this category out of their brilliant big brains and onto paper. And it ended up being a 50-page ultimate guide to this discipline, which is fucking amazing. Hope I can swear on the cutting room. I'm sure you're cool with it.
It's all good.
It was literally mind-blowing to see how much time and effort and thought and discipline and intent they had put into this category and shaping the future of their product and shaping the future of their conversations and shaping the future of their global partner network around this discipline, this new category. And it was a lot of work to get it out of their heads and onto paper. And I was definitely, I think, a big part in that. However, it was their brains, their vision. I just kind of helped it get out into the world in a clear way. And then, I helped to chop that 50-page guide into a million different types of content and webinars and blog posts, obviously, and ebooks and templates and tools and millions of other things. And eventually we evolved that static PDF into an interactive learning center. I grew the team, and it was no longer editorial, but also video, graphic design, and digital learning. So we were able to build this amazing learning center where prospects, customers, partners, anyone who wanted to hire better, manage better, they could learn about how to do those things with talent optimization and take interactive courses and certifications. And it was really easy to answer your question because I did not have to extract anything. It was all up there in their big, brilliant brains. And I just had to ask questions, understand, reword things, rework things, and kind of be a guide in that way. So for me, that's the biggest gift any executive team can give to their employees and their marketers, is to have some sort of vision, and then it makes everything easier.
That's awesome. And kind of along those lines, so people were very forthcoming with, you weren't having to like pull it out of people, which is fantastic. What was your process for having those conversations and then translating that to working with the other people to create that foundation, right? 50-page document is insane. That's awesome. But there's a process to that. And there's a process to like communicate that across the board once you have, you're being a translator essentially. So what did that look like?
So I think in terms of structure, and I'm an editor. So I always want to think about how is this piece going to be structured? So we had it structured into 4 main pieces, and there was a lot of whiteboarding going on, kind of like a beautiful mind, drawings. And hey, wouldn't it make more sense if we actually moved this, section here? And we really had to kind of think about how we're going to visually represent this discipline and how that was going to translate in copy and how we could talk about the flow. And is it a cycle or is it linear? And we had all of those kinds of conversations. And I think that whiteboarding and having the visual before you go in and just try to word vomit this 50-page, that doesn't work. So I think that starting with a visual, simplifying it, boiling it down to its most simple, high-level parts makes it a lot easier. And it's kind of like outlining an article or a research report. When I write a research report and I get back all this data, I did a survey, I have like endless possibilities. I'm not just going to sit down and write. I'm going to understand like, what are the key points? What kind of section should I have? And it's the same thing with taking your point of view or your big idea and getting it down on paper.
I love that. And what role, right? Because one of the things I wanted to talk about with you is building a high performance content team. So let's find the segue there on taking that foundation that you've put together and then using that to hire the right people, build out and structure your teams. Like how does that translate? Because I know that, like, from my personal experience, I know that having that foundation is super important to like writing the ads to get people involved and like figuring out the mix of people that I want to have. So what does that look like for you?
So it depends on the content strategy. It depends on who else is on the marketing team. It depends on who the content team reports up to. There's just so many different considerations if you are building out an in-house content team. So for me, I was at PI for 3.5 years. The content team went through several iterations. We were reporting into demand gen at first. We were content, editorial, and video. We eventually switched into brand and demand. And we added on digital learning. And the reason why is because originally digital learning reported into product. And there was just a need to have us much more tightly aligned so that we could have kind of a keeper of all of the knowledge, not the knowledge, but the content. So like one person who had a clear view into all these different things that were going on to reduce duplicative work, to, make sure that we were working across silos rather than in silos, making sure that all the pieces connected, and building that learning center really was the push we needed to bring digital learning onto marketing. And I think it was a really smart move because, like you said about this show, thinking about format, you could have a podcast or you could choose to have this live kind of TV interactive experience. And I mean, you could choose to give people a PDF, or you could choose to build an interactive learning center. And it's kind of, what kind of experience do you want to give people? What do you value? And for us, we really were rooted in science. We were a startup that was like, 50 years old. I think we had an article saying something like the 50-year-old startup. We're rooted in, science from Harvard University. This like assessment that was founding the company was founded on is really academic in nature and rigorous. So we were, that was really important to us to be educators and have that kind of scientific way about us versus just like top 10 employee engagement blogs. Like we could have done that because like our software allows you to measure and act on employee engagement data, but that wasn't our vibe. Like our vibe was much more like, let's go deep. And let's make it accessible. It doesn't have to be hard, but like we're going to teach you like the educational like discipline about people data and using this to be a better leader. It's not going to be easy to learn how to do, talent optimization, but it's going to be worth it. So I think that your brand identity also defines how you're going to deliver your content, your curriculum, your idea, and therefore what kind of people and skills you need on your team. And I know one time I was listening to an old podcast episode where Udi from Gong was on, and something he said really resonated with me. You have to understand what are your core competencies that you really need to have in-house, and what are no big deal, we can outsource this, right? So for us, it was extremely important to have editorial in-house because we weren't just writing top 10 employee engagement blogs. We were writing really deep stuff about people, data, and behavioral science. And it's just stuff that you're not just going to outsource and somebody's just going to get it overnight. It's going to take time to develop that subject matter expertise, which is why all the content that we created, with the exception of a handful of blogs here and there, were done with our in-house editorial team.
I think that's awesome. And knowing the difference in the types of people and that balance that you're going to need is really one of the critical things. When I hire, I certainly look for people who are specialists in their given area, and try to find those places where they overlap, right? So, and this is with freelancers in particular, but like when I was at QuickBooks, I had brought on somebody who had written several For Dummies accounting books and somebody who was an in-house lawyer at a giant tool company. And what we had found was that there were a lot of overlaps between those two skill sets, which was fantastic. They were specialists in those areas. And then we have some generalists who are able to fill in the gaps along the way. And especially with something that's so specialized, like what you're talking about, so important to have people who really understand it and really get it. Now, you had mentioned the interactivity of the show, and I want to encourage anybody who's following along here to ask any questions along the way. We've got some really great stuff, like really mine Erin's brain here, because I think that there's some excellent insights to grab out of this conversation. Now, tell me a little bit about your pregame before we get into the piece, right? This is the perfect segue. We'll take the next couple of minutes here to talk about the pregame. You get a piece, you've had the conversation with people, you've communicated everything that you need, both on the broad level and then sort of on the more granular level, I imagine. What's that pregame for, like, getting into the piece?
Are you talking about the pregame when I'm enabling the writer to go out and write the piece, or the pregame for me when I'm sitting down to start editing a piece when I get back? Both. Okay. So it really depends. One thing I really love about in-house writers is you don't really have to do pregame. Like, they just get it. You've worked with them, and you almost barely have to edit their stuff after you've worked with a writer for a few years. Like, it's just like boom, 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 quick tweak, quick tweak. You get it. You know the audience. You get the point. You get the strategy. Like, so that's just amazing. Another reason why I'm so like bullish on at least getting a few people in-house, and then freelancing for sure. That's like a great additional add to your in-house team. But when I do freelance, outsource things to freelancers, I found, I have succeeded and failed with outsourcing to freelancing. And I'll tell you about a failure. Just because I'm someone who can just dive in and get it. And it's usually like, it might not be perfect, but I'm going to get you like 90, 95% there. I don't need hand holding. Just give me like the brand voice docs, give me some stuff about your point of view, your brand narrative, and I'll get you 90% of the way there. But not everybody is like that. Like, some people actually like want or need more structure, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I just originally assumed everyone was like me, and I'd be like, here's the title, like, here's this, like, go do it. And then I would get back stuff that was unusable. And it wasn't their fault. It was my fault. So I would pay them and I would just write it myself, which is a total waste of money and time. And I learned very quickly that I can't do that. So then I started doing something later on in my career, which really had great results. I put together a briefing doc that was different than I had for when I was onboarding full-time writers. It was like 2 pages. I would schedule a 30-minute chat with this new writer. I would walk them through, show them exactly where to watch the product tour, exactly what, best performing content looked like and what it was that worked, and just really walking them through everything that they would need to know, trying to anticipate questions, trying to answer other questions that other freelancers had asked in the past, spending that 30 minutes Sometimes, that's not a great fit for all writers. I know a lot of writers that freaking hate talking to people and hate getting on calls. And that's why they don't work for a company. That's why they work from home. And so sometimes it can be like, oh shit, I got to get on a call with this lady. Like, this sucks. I got to, turn my camera on. But I found that it greatly reduced the amount of edits. And it made the content much more usable. So I would say going forward, if you can make a point to spend 30 minutes with a new writer, especially one that you think you're going to be able to work with over time, it's not just like a quick one-off, I think that it's definitely going to be worth your time. And it's something that worked for me.
I've done that with when I was at Shopify in particular. It didn't scale at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you spend a lot of time, especially if you're managing a lot of freelancers, you're spending a lot of time doing that. But after a while, and it's just like working in-house with anybody, right? They kind of get your thought process. So you really get into that. And when that happens, right? What was the relationship that started to develop with some of these freelancers that you were starting to do this with? What was the difference in the relationship with them versus people that you didn't do that with? And like, the retention rate on both of those sides, I think, is another really good question.
That's a great question. Like I said, at PI, I didn't work with a lot of freelancers. It was never something where I was going to work with you for 3 years. It was always like a stopgap or a project, or if one of my full-time writers was really busy because they were working on some extra big project, and I might bring someone in for a month or two. So I would say like retention wasn't necessarily a goal. Of course, I want to have a good relationship. I want people to leave the relationship feeling like, oh, I had a great time with the Predictive Index and Erin. In the past, it was different. Like when I worked at an agency for 3.5 years, I had my in-house team of like 15 writers. But sometimes we had more work than we had bodies to do. So we had a freelance network, and those people were more long-term. And it wasn't that we were working with them every week, month over month. It was that you were long-term. I was going to work with you for 3.5 years, but not all the time. I might need you every 4 months. I might reach out to you. So maintaining those relationships are important as well. And I think that is really when freelancers can come in key, is when your main core team is really busy on a big project or this, shifting responsibilities, and you have your go-to solid vetted freelancers that can just come in as pinch hitters. I think that's really important to have.
That's awesome. In audience, I'm curious, do any of you work with freelancers on a regular basis? Just go ahead and drop in the chat, like, yes or no, and like, what's the difference between your freelance team versus your in-house team? Very curious about this, actually, because it's something that different companies have very different views on. All right, so pre-game, you get the article, you're getting ready to hop in. What mental state are you putting yourself into before you jump into a piece?
I don't have actual diagnosed ADHD, but I feel like I have it a lot, because if I'm not in the zone, I can't do deep work, and that counts for writing or editing. So, sometimes though you don't have the headspace or the time to get in the zone. You might be in meetings as a managing editor or director of content. You might be in meetings 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day, and you have an hour to like edit some stuff or give some feedback. So too bad you're not in the zone. You got to freaking figure it out. So for me, it's trying to time block so that I can have at least an hour, because if I'm trying to edit in 30-minute pockets, that can be really hard. So trying to time block and give myself at least an hour so I have time to get in that headspace, to get in that deep work. And I find a lot of times I'm very easily distracted by other thoughts of things I need to do. So if I'm editing an article, I probably lose focus about 3 times and I have to bring myself back. So it's a lot about getting in the headspace and trying to really stay there. So that is the first thing I do, is time block and tell myself, you got to get in this headspace, because you're going to get distracted by all these other things that you need to prep for this meeting and this call. And, so that is number 1. Number 2, of course, I'm going to, who is this for? What do they already know? What's the CTA? All that basic editor stuff that you just need to know before you go into an article. Otherwise, you're making unhelpful edits, which is actually really interesting lead into the article that we're going to live edit today, is that I don't really have a lot of context. I will share the context that I do have, but that was kind of a fun challenge because normally I'd say, oh, you're writing this for a director of content. That person already knows this. Like, you're telling them something they already know. And I don't freaking know who this article's written for. So the feedback is never going to be as good as it would be in normal circumstances when I know who's the audience, what's their, already established level of knowledge, and what do you want them to do? What do you want them to know, feel, do after consuming this content? So, get into that kind of headspace too.
I love that. Know, feel, do. That's really important. I want to emphasize that. What do you want them to know, feel, and do? Not emphasized nearly enough, I think. It's something I know that I sometimes forget.
That's not true. I mean, we think, what do we want them to do? But it's typically very self-serving.
Yes, very true. Very true. All right. Let's hop into it.
Cool. All right. First of all, thank you so much, Ashley. You rock. You are brave enough to put yourself out there, and it's not anonymous because right underneath the first two sentences is your picture with your full name. So you're not trying to hide. You're putting yourself out there, and I think that's freaking awesome. And it's such an example for a leader. You're a content strategist at Atlassian. You're a freaking leader, and this is setting such a good example for everyone else. And I was talking with Tommy before this, and I said, he's been edited. He's got ripped apart. I said, you could edit my stuff and rip it apart. We can each, find ways to improve content. You should, if you're an editor, and any other editor, going in my piece would be able to do the same. So just wanted to say that and give you a shout out. You're freaking awesome. And thank you for sharing this article. Context. So Ashley told me this is a bit of a rant. It has been sitting in my inbox or sitting in my email or my Google Drive, I forget, for a couple of years. So this is something that there's this tweet by this woman, Shelly, on Twitter. And the tweet says, what do folks think about having shared bylines, giving credit to the executive and the ghostwriter? So Ashley had some feelings. Those of us who know Ashley know that she is verbose. That's why Ashley and I both prefer LinkedIn to Twitter, because we have a lot to say. We have a hard time keeping to the Twitter character limit. So Ashley decided to write this article that said, I don't know where it's supposed to live. So I didn't ask. I kind of just wanted to go in blind and see where, things took us. I don't know if this is going to live on Ashley's personal blog. I didn't know if it's going to be a LinkedIn article so that it would go to her audience who already know her. I wasn't sure if she was going to post it to Medium, potentially getting in front of people who don't know her. So that said, I am giving kind of generic broad feedback and asking some of those questions just to make sure that it's being written with the publishing platform and the audience in mind. Okay, so here, Ashley said a few weeks ago, Shelly tweeted this. I noted that I need more than 280 characters for this discussion. And she pasted her comments underneath Shelly's tweet. And I felt like that is a little bit of a missed opportunity for Ashley to add a little bit of her personality. Like I said, I know that she jokes about, Twitter's not my favorite because I'm so verbose, I'm so long-winded. I think that could be a kind of nice way to show some personality up front and just kind of let people get to know her a bit more because she's very likable. So that was one kind of comment there. I also wanted to say before I continue my edits, how I like to edit is, and this is how I like people to edit me too. So when I'm working with a client, I always tell them on the first pass, especially if it's something big like a report or a long ebook or white paper, I say, don't pay attention to the words. Pay attention to the flow, the story, the meat. And then once we got that right, then I'm going to polish up the language and make sure it's pretty. And that's so important because a lot of times you could spend so many hours making these beautiful sentences and, writing has rhythm and all of that. But if the story's wrong and the message isn't there and the flow is off, you're going to have to write it all over again. And I've learned that the hard way because that's happened to me in the past. So just want to say that this is not being edited for like line edits. I'm not like, oh, you should reword this or blah, blah, blah. There might be 1 or 2 comments, and that's only to get the writer thinking like, oh, so if this is highlighted here, I should be looking out for this in the rest of the piece. Otherwise, it's mostly about why is this being said? Who are you speaking to? Maybe you should combine these 2 sections. So it's more about the storyline, the flow of the story, the formatting. It's less about the pretty sentences. That's like part 2 of the edit. So just wanted to say that.
I like that. And I want to make a metaphor there before we jump back into it. It's like going to a movie and the movie has beautiful cinematography with nothing to tie it together.
I've seen some of those movies. They're not very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So right here, I feel very strongly that was just a note. Edit out those lazy adverbs. I know that there's a better way to say that would be a little more punchy. And I know, again, this isn't a finished piece. This was just like a brain dump and a rant. So this is just a suggestion like, hey, when you go through and polish this, run this whole piece through Hemingway Editor. It's such a great, easy tool just to help you kind of find those little pieces that you could polish. So her first section is here. The concerns with giving credit to the ghostwriter. So my first question is, and I call myself chief picky editor because I just ask a million questions, like the concerns, like says who? Shelley, the person who did the tweet. Was this the collective concerns of all the people who commented on Shelley's tweet? I want more context. So rather than going right into the bullet points underneath the subheading, I would want to see a little sentence or 2 that just like, hey, I went through, I did the hard work, so you don't have to go back and read all those comments. I've distilled everybody's feedback into this one post, and here are the 3 main concerns that everybody shares. So some sort of context to frame this would be nice. So the first bullet is damaging credibility. And if you click on that, if you click on the damaging credibility part, it should kind of pop. Oh, so she says the main concern with a co-byline or an editorial contribution is damaging the credibility of the primary individual that's promoting the idea. But I didn't quite get the why. She kind of goes into like, keep going with the story, but I wanted to understand why. That's how my mind thinks. I'm like a why person. I know some people are how. I'm like, why? Why is that? I want a little more detail. I always want examples and details. I also said it's a word wall. And I looked at it from my mobile device, which I always do. I do a lot of coaching with executives that are writing LinkedIn posts, and it's the most common feedback I give all the time. You're writing this on your laptop. It doesn't look that bad. It looks like 7 lines, but I show a screenshot on my cell phone. It's 12 lines. That's really hard to read. So I always say, like, maybe instead of this being 3 bullets, maybe it could be an H3. And then under the H3, you can break that up into like 2 or 3 little shorter, more easy to kind of parse mini paragraphs.
I want to stop you for a second there. Reading things on your phone first. I've started to write on my phone occasionally now because it helps with the word economy. When did you start doing that? And what was I kind of get the idea behind it, but like, yeah, when did you start doing that? And what was the switch in your brain?
It was when I started reading studies about what percentage of people consume content on their phone. And then when I started going into Google Analytics and looking at our traffic sources, realizing like, damn, like that's a lot more people than I thought was, reading our blog posts on a phone. I don't personally read really blog posts on a phone, but I know that in many cases in companies I've worked with, you might have like 35-40% of your audience reading a blog post on your phone. And 12 lines is like half of your phone. So I always like to make it as skimmable as possible. It's less important for a big, long piece. Like if someone's sitting down to read, I don't know, a report or some sort of ultimate guide, they're probably not going to read that on their phone. But people are going to, need long pieces to be skimmable anyway, but not quite as skimmable as like an article or a blog. And again, I don't know where this is going to be published. If it's going to be a LinkedIn article, 60% of LinkedIn users access LinkedIn from their mobile device, a little bit more than 60%. So might want to consider that. in terms of how long your paragraph should be.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And also, I don't know who the audience is. I'm assuming maybe it's people like me. So in the top, it says a co-byline or an editorial contribution. I don't know, even myself, exactly what you mean by editorial contribution. I do have a background in editorial. I was a magazine editor. So I think maybe it means like submitting to a Forbes or some sort of site like that, but I'm not 100% sure. And if I'm not 100% sure, there might be people that are have less years working in editorial. And so maybe it would be nice to just kind of put some parentheses and just clarify what that is if it's not a known term to the audience. So it really depends on, again, who's going to be reading this and what's their assumed level of knowledge. All right, so then if you scroll down, the secondary concern, let's see. The second bullet point, the secondary concern, and I said, why is this a concern? So it kind of goes into the action. So teams need to create guidelines to ensure that all parties are treated fairly, but I don't really know why, I just like to know some more details, which is why I think, again, that this section would be better served by not bullet points and using like H3s so that you can kind of build out a little bit more of the story. I felt, and you're going to see what ends up happening at the end of the article, it turns in from like a rant and like a dissection into like tangible, actionable tips, which is cool. But I would have liked to spend a little more time up here. And that's just because of who I am. So it, again, depends on who your reader is. If you're reading for someone who's maybe like executive, director level, 10 years of experience or more, maybe they want less of the tactical tips and they want more of this theory and the thinking, because that's what they're drawn to. So I want more of this. But if the audience is more people who maybe they're junior content marketing managers, maybe they want more of those tactical tips. So that's just something to consider also, if the section should be longer or shorter based on audience. So yeah, there's a bunch of, little how-so, what does this mean? Why is this a concern? I left a comment here. It says, this feels stiff for a personal blog or a LinkedIn article. I'm not sure which exactly. Oh, there it was. The guidelines organizations must also ensure. So like Ashley's not a stiff person. So like if she's writing this for placement on like a company blog and she's trying to embody the voice of that site, it makes total sense. But I feel like if this is a LinkedIn article or something more voicey coming from her and people that know her, it should just feel a little more conversational, as if like if you were on a Zoom call with Ashley, she wouldn't say organizations must also ensure. Like she's just a real person. So I would expect to see more of her actual conversational voice, depending on, again, where it's going to be published.
Well, it's interesting you say that too, because it like that kind of language right there becomes incongruous with how it starts, right? Which is like, this is going to be a rant.
Right.
And then we kind of switch voice.
That's a great call out. Yeah. You definitely want to have that same voice all the way through. If it's a white paper, maybe that is the right voice. It's organizations must ensure, and that's speaking on behalf of the company. It's the company's point of view, not your own. And if it's you and you're like, hey, I'm having a rant and here's what I said on Twitter, then to shift into a more formal tone, it just kind of is jarring to the reader. It was a little jarring to me.
Yeah.
All right. The benefits. Can you click on the benefits?
Yep.
Kind of pop forward.
Like eyebrows. They're sisters, not twins.
Yeah. So this is nitpicky stuff, but like I'm super picky about like bulleted lists. If, the first bullet starts with a verb, all the other bullets in the list, I like them to start with a verb. I like that list, a similarity. And I'm the same with like subheadings. So the one above it was about the challenges and it was a complete sentence. So this one is just like the benefits. So it should either be the challenges, the benefits, or it should be the challenges of doing X, the benefits of doing X. Like they should jive together. And like I said here, just like eyebrows, they're not twins, they're sisters. So they don't have to be 100% mimicky perfect, but they have to at least be in alignment. So I gave just a suggestion. Sometimes also when I edit, I don't give suggestions for every single line in this phase of editing, but I might give a suggestion here or there just to be helpful.
Nice. Brenna says she's loving this, by the way.
Oh, great. Hi, Brenna. All right. So
now we're scaling thought leadership.
I don't have like a lot of new comments here. Nothing else that I haven't already said, like just making sure we're breaking up the word walls. We're, not being super formal, looking for the lazy adverbs. I'm not going to say the same shit over and over because that's annoying. Like,
yeah,
I've said it once. And I also know, like, I'm speaking to a senior content marketer who knows that if she sees it once, she's going to go through and check the whole article to make sure that if it's a problem identified in the first paragraph, she'll take the time to go through and make sure it's addressed throughout the article. I
want to hop in on something here, though.
Of course.
Like, this is something that I want to jump in on. Is this kind of plays off of what I was saying before, how you go, this is going to be a rant. What this is starting to fall into here, from what I can see, is that same sort of cadence that makes content not, or like articles themselves not have its own unique voice, right? So it's beyond just the rant part, and it's like thought leadership requires a two-prong approach, right? You can see this sort of cadence and rhythm in a lot of pieces, and I know that there's way more to this. I know that like what ends up happening is, from my perspective and what I've seen before in pieces in general, is that it's really easy to get into the rhythm just so you can get your thoughts out, and this is a draft that never made it beyond a thing, or made it beyond where it's supposed to go. But it's just something to really consider, because it's something that like always stands out in my mind of, once you start getting into the rhythm of just regular blog posts, you know the cadence I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I mean, I wrote a blog a day for many years. I totally get it.
Yeah. So that's just something I want to point out there as we're kind of going through. All right, that's it.
Yeah, and this is like really freaking interesting stuff. Like I said to Ashley, I'm like obsessed with this topic. I want to talk more about it, and I think that it deserves a lot of discussion. And Ashley's opinion is actually really important to me. She's freaking smart, but I feel like this might make me kind of like, I said I have like the ADHD problem. It's a little too formal. I sometimes have a hard time. Like, it's like when you're reading a really formal book and sometimes you have to go back and reread the same sentence. You're like, wait a minute, what did I just read? I feel like that kind of happens here because it's kind of like said in a way that's unnecessarily complicated. Again, assuming that the audience is someone like me, someone casual, someone that, I don't necessarily jive with the more formal language. It depends on who's the intended audience ultimately. But I did find myself, my head was, and I'm super interested in this topic, and I did find my mind wandering once or twice. And I think it's because some things was a little bit too unnecessarily complex. If it was more conversational, I might have just boom, gone all the way through the bottom. I also noticed a problem with the flow, in that we're kind of jumping between challenges and benefits. So we set this section up to be about benefits, but then we're going back and forth and talking about problems again. So for example, there's a chicken and egg problem with scaling thought leadership. So for me, if it talks about a problem, we should have addressed that in the problem section, so that now, okay, you already know that there's a chicken and egg problem. So now we're going to tell you the benefits. So the jumping back and forth is a little jarring for me, because again, it makes me stop and think, wait, are we in the benefits? Or, it's just, you never want to jar the reader and make them think harder than they have to think.
Bretta asks, how do you keep away from falling into that cadence without being too off the wall? I'll answer that. And then Erin, I would love to get your thoughts.
While he answers that, can you just give a little more description? Like, what do you mean falling into that cadence?
The thing that I was talking about before, where you have a hard time distinguishing,
got it,
blog posts from blog posts. So I would say go too far off the wall and then scale back. I definitely keep a different voice when I write for myself versus when I write for the company. But I don't mind going off the wall. I personally believe, and Erin, you do a great job of this just on your LinkedIn in general too. I personally believe that the cadence that you put out there and the musicality of your words and the line length and the notes essentially that you're using in your word choice, that is all how you are able to convey meaning and tone and personality. And when somebody says to me, "Oh, you can't infer meaning from text," I think that there's something kind of fundamentally flawed with that logic, right? There is sometimes, right, you can, but the majority of the time you can, and you can get a lot of personality just with the way that you're stringing words together, and the way that you're putting those words together in general. So I would say go too far off the wall to begin with, and then if you have to pull it back, do so, but start from a place where it's like just go completely off the rails, because it's the only way that you're gonna get that personality and perspective out into the market. All right, go ahead, Erin. What's your take on that?
For me personally, I have a naturally really conversational voice. I like to, I don't know, be kind of playful. That's just like my natural kind of corny mom humor. Sometimes I got to, but I'm bumped with a little drum emoji. That's just like the way I am. And so then I have to shift gears because I'm writing this research report for the C-suite, and it's about this like really, cerebral topic, and it has to be like organizations must ensure, because that's how the brand voice is. So
Right.
I think that by switching it up and doing different types of formats and working with different type of companies and switching between the corporate voice and my own voice, that keeps it fresh so that I don't always fall into the same humdrum stuff. If I was in-house as a writer writing for one company, it would probably be I'm spending some time in my free time doing creative fiction or poetry or social posts that are voicey, just something to kind of retrain your brain into there are different ways to communicate. And then the last thing I'll say, which aligns really nice with you, Tommy, is the musicality. My husband wants to fucking kill me whenever I'm home. He's home and I'm writing because I hum. I don't actually say the words, but I'm like, as I'm rereading my things, because the music is everything. And that's why I've never been a writer who could write for 2 cents a word, because I'm a really slow writer. I obsess over every sound and has to just be just right, like little violins. And I'm not going to send it off unless it's really musical and beautiful. So that's important to me too.
Yeah, and I'm going to just jump off of that, and then we're going to have to wrap it up pretty soon here.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to wrap it up too, because for some reason my computer's not charging. I'm using my husband's office, and I'm just all off my game. No. I don't know. So I might die in a minute or two, but it's almost 6 o'clock. We're good.
Oh gosh, let's hope not. The other thing that I want to kind of express there, and it goes back to the research process as you're creating voice or communicating with the C-suite and up, that hey, we need to have a unique voice and position in the market, is that it is really easy to look at your competitors and see where they all sound the same. And one of the things that I look at when I do that research early on in the process is to find those places that I can jab, right? Especially in like a startup environment. How can I say things, even if we're all saying the same thing? How can I say those things in a way that nobody else is going to say them? How can I be a little bit more honest, or a little bit more formal, or a little bit more abrasive, right? And how can I present that information? Because then you've got that, right? But then you've got the political game that you have to play on top of that. How do you present that information in a way that says, hey, if we took away all of our branding and we just had the words, can you tell the difference between us and them?
Right.
You have to do that research to find out where you can jab, and then wear them down in the way that when you have to go toe to toe, like then what do you do where you've worn them down so people are still thinking of you even when they're talking to them, right? So that's just something I want to throw in there.
For me, I mean, my solution to that, and I totally agree, it's, I say this a lot, sticky. Made to Stick by Chip Heath. If you ever read that book, it's a good introduction to sticky concepts. So I say things that sometimes people are like, what the hell? Like, that was a weird thing to say. I'm like, I bet you're going to say it to a friend, or I bet you I'm going to hear somebody post about this in 2 months from now. And wouldn't you know, it happens. Like, the weird things that I say, I paint these weird pictures in people's heads, and some people might roll their eyes and think it's lame, but other people will tell me years later, they'll be like, hey, I remember you taught me this, or I've put this into my onboarding materials for my team when I onboard new writers, because you know what? It stuck with them. That's legit. The whole goal of my job as a content marketer is to change your mind, make you think differently, and ultimately you're going to adopt new ways of doing things and new ways of thinking. So if I die, if my computer dies, I want to go off on that note, because that's really important to me, is finding ways to make your point of view and your message stick.
Cool. All right.
Cool.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the night.